to the room of requirement. So this is going to be the first of a series of videos that I'm going to be doing covering grimoires. This one in particular is going to be about the Arbatel, the grimoire of Olympic spirits and sacred magic. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, so I wanted to state this before we start studying the grimoires. So a lot of people, they're like, well, why do we have to learn this stuff? Why does it matter? So before we enter the study of grimoires, it's important to understand why these texts matter. Grimoires are not merely books of spells, superstition, or forgotten ritual formulas. They are the preserved architecture of Western esotericism, maps of the unseen world, records of angelic and planetary intelligences, and manuals for aligning the human soul with higher spiritual order. To study them seriously is to study the discipline of high magic itself. Purification, invocation, symbolic literacy, divine ascent, and the great work of illumination. These books teach us that enlightenment in the Western tradition is not an escape from form, but the sanctification of form through wisdom, will, and sacred order. Okay. So book recommendation here, let me widen my screen so you can see this better. Okay, so this is just a copy that I got. I think I got it off Amazon. Okay, so it has a really long title. It's not that thick. It's really thin. It is called the Arbatel of Magick, or the Spiritual Wisdom of the Ancients. As well, wise men of the people of God, as magi of the Gentiles, for the illustration of the glory of God and his love to mankind. So it's pretty long. This one itself is the Robert Turner version, and I'm going to kind of get into this a little bit, but here it is. So I will also tell you that if you're going to start studying grimoires, you have to know astrology at least on a basic level, or all of this is just going to be gibberish to you. So that's why I'm always preaching, knowing astrology and basic astrology. Okay. All right. So the Arbatel is one of the most important grimoires of Renaissance ceremonial magic. Its full Latin title is the Arbatel de Magia Veterum, often translated as the Arbatel of the Magic of the Ancients, or Arbatel Concerning the Magic of the Ancients. It was first published in Basel in 1575, and a surviving digitized copy lists as an 87-page work from that year. The English-speaking world largely encountered it through Robert Turner's 1655 translation, printed in a larger collection associated with Agrippa, geomancy, magical elements, and the Arbatel of Magick. So this book right here is deeply ingrained with the divination system of geomancy. It is one of the harder ones to learn. It seems pretty simple when you first start looking at it, but if you guys are interested and want to know what geomancy is, there's some videos on YouTube you guys can look up really quickly. I think there's some 10-minute videos on how to do it. It is one of the divination systems that I'm teaching myself to do. So that's what this book basically entails. So if you're into geomancy, you're going to know about the Olympic spirits. Okay. What makes the Arbatel so fascinating is that it stands apart from many other grimoires. It is not primarily a manual of demonic conjuration. It is not obsessed with coercion. It is not written in the same atmosphere as the darker Solomonic manuals. Instead, it presents a vision of sacred magic deeply shaped by Christian piety, Renaissance philosophy, planetary cosmology, and the belief that the universe is governed by divine intelligence. At its heart, the Arbatel is concerned with the relationship between the human being, God, celestial hierarchy, and the invisible intelligences known as the Olympic spirits. So what is the Arbatel? The Arbatel is a Renaissance grimoire, but it is also much more than a magical manual. It is a text of spiritual instruction, planetary theology, and sacred philosophy. Its teachings are arranged through aphorisms or concise wisdom statements rather than through long ritual scripts. This gives the work a unique character. It reads almost like a guide for the soul of the magician, offering instruction on how one should live, think, pray, discern, and approach the hidden forces of creation. The Arbatel is often described as unusually clear and positive compared to many other grimoires. Joseph Peterson's Esoteric Archives notes that the Arbatel first appeared in Latin in Basel in 1575, and the text itself is structured around tomes and septenaries of aphorisms. The aphoristic format is important because it shows that the Arbatel is not merely giving techniques, it is attempting to shape the consciousness and moral orientation of the practitioner. In the worldview of the Arbatel, magic is not separated from divine order. The magician is not meant to act as an isolated will opposing itself upon creation. Instead, the magician is called to participate in a living cosmos governed by God, angels, celestial spirits, planetary forces, and sacred hierarchy. The true practitioner must therefore cultivate reverence, gratitude, discipline, and wisdom before attempting to approach the invisible world. To understand the Arbatel, we must understand the world that produced it. The 16th century was a time of enormous intellectual, religious, and esoteric transformation. Renaissance Europe was filled with renewed interest in Hermetic philosophy, Neoplatonism, astrology, alchemy, angelology, medicine, natural magic, and the hidden correspondences between heaven and earth. In this world, the boundary between science, religion, philosophy, and magic was not as fixed as it is today. Many educated people believed that the universe was ordered by divine intelligence and that the planets, the elements, stars, angels, and spirits participated in a vast spiritual hierarchy. To study nature was to study the language of God, and to study the heavens was to study the pattern of divine order. To practice magic, at least in theory, to work with that order rather than against it. The Arbatel belongs to the Renaissance vision of the cosmos. It assumes that the world is not dead matter. It assumes that creation is alive with intelligence, meaning, invisible governance. This is why the text speaks of spirits not merely as beings to be commanded, but as part of a lawful celestial system under divine authority. The meaning of magic of the ancients. So the subtitle of the Arbatel, Magic of the Ancients, is extremely important. It suggests that the text is not preparing itself as something entirely new, but as a recovery or a continuation of older wisdom. The Renaissance imagination often looked backward towards ancient sources like Egypt, Greece, Rome, Hebrew wisdom, Hermetic teachings, Chaldean astrology, and Neoplatonic philosophy. To call something ancient was to give it dignity, authority, and spiritual depth. In this context, the Arbatel presents magic as a sacred inheritance. It's not framed as superstition or rebellion, but as a disciplined art known to the wise. The magician is not meant to be reckless or prideful. The magician is meant to be a student of creation, learning how divine wisdom expresses itself through celestial intelligences, planetary forces, and spiritual law. This gives the Arbatel a very different atmosphere from many modern assumptions about magic. It is not about escaping religion. It isn't about rejecting God. It's about understanding creation as a divine system and learning how to operate within it with reverence. The Christian character of the Arbatel. One of the most important things to understand about the Arbatel is its deeply Christian tone. The text repeatedly emphasizes God, prayer, piety, divine permission, moral conduct, and the proper use of spiritual knowledge. This may surprise modern students who assume that grimoires always stand outside religion or against it. The Arbatel shows that this is not true. Many Renaissance and early modern magical texts were written within Christian frameworks. Their authors often believed that angels, planets, spirits, divine names, and sacred rituals belonged within a larger theological universe. The magician was not necessarily trying to bypass God. Ideally, the magician was attempting to work under divine authority. The Arbatel, therefore, presents a form of magic that is devotional rather than rebellious. It repeatedly warns against pride, vanity, misuse of knowledge, and spiritual corruption. Its practitioner is expected to be morally grounded. This is one of the text's most important lessons. Spiritual power without spiritual maturity becomes dangerous. The Arbatel is famous for being structured around aphorisms. These short teachings form the backbone of the text and serve as instructions for both magical practice and spiritual life. Instead of overwhelming the reader with ritual complexity, the Arbatel begins by teaching principles. This matters because aphorisms function differently than ordinary instructions. They are meant to be contemplated. They refine the mind, they train perception, and they reveal the assumptions behind the practice. The Arbatel's aphorisms teach that the magician must know what to seek, what to refuse, how to remain aligned with God, and how to use spiritual gifts rightly, and how to avoid being led astray by arrogance or deception. In this sense, the Arbatel is not merely concerned with contacting spirits. It is concerned with forming a wise practitioner. It teaches that magic begins not with tools, circles, seals, or names, but with the inner condition of the one who approaches the work. The most famous teaching of the Arbatel concerns the 7 Olympic spirits. These are celestial or planetary intelligences associated with the 7 classical planets of ancient and medieval cosmology: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. The 7 Olympic spirits are commonly named Eritron, Bethor, Phaleg, Ok, Haggith, Ophiel, and Fuel. Sources of the Olympic spirits identify them as spirits appearing in Renaissance and later ceremonial magical texts, especially the Arbatel. These spirits are not simply planetary symbols. In the magical worldview of the Arbatel, they are intelligences associated with the governing powers of the heavens. Each one corresponds to a planetary force and governs particular domains of influence. So together, they reveal a cosmos structured through number, hierarchy, planetary order, and divine permission. Eritron corresponds to Saturn. Bethor corresponds to Jupiter. Phaleg corresponds to Mars. Ok corresponds to the Sun. Haggith corresponds to Venus. Ophiel to Mercury. Fuel to the Moon. These 7 intelligences form the heart of the Arbatel's magical system and show how deeply planetary magic shaped Renaissance esotericism. Okay, so I wanted to show you what they looked like. So here on the left, these are the symbols. Probably the most common place that you're going to find these is in the 7 archangel seals. I don't know if you guys noticed, but sometimes I wear like a necklace, like a round necklace. It's black. It's got silver writing on it. So it has the 7 archangels, and then it has these Olympic spirits around the center of it. So they're meant for protection. So I'll read you what it says here. It says, Olympic spirits are those who inhabit the firmament and the stars of the firmament. Their function is to execute destiny, to administer fateful events as much as God pleases and allows, so that no evil demon, no evil fate can harm the one who sits in the shadow of the Most High. Early Olympian spirits teaches and accomplishes all that the star over which it presides foretells. Yet it can do nothing from power to deed without divine permission. Indeed, God alone gives it the power and this action. So basically that's, this is a page out of the book. So I just wanted to show you guys what it looks like. It's kind of funny because what it reminds me of is like when we were in school and we had those, the planet, I guess kind of like an example of like the planetary orbits, and then it has like these lines, and then the planets are sitting on top of them. Sometimes you make them when you're in like 5th grade. It just kind of reminds me of like, those little things that I'm not describing it correctly. Things, they're models. They were like planetary orbital models. Okay, and you would like make them when we were in like elementary school. But that's what these remind me of. And so I don't know if there's any connection there to that, but it just kind of looks really similar. So, okay. So To modern people, planets are usually understood as physical objects in space. To Renaissance magicians, however, planets were also spiritual principles. Each planet represented a cosmic force operating in the heavens, in nature, in the body, and in the soul. Saturn was not merely a distant body, it was the principle of time, boundary, structure, and limitation. Jupiter was expansion, dignity, and beneficence. Mars was force, courage, conflict, and action. The Sun was illumination and vitality. Venus was beauty, love, harmony, and attraction. Mercury is intellect, language, skill, and subtlety. And the Moon was imagination, fertility, rhythm, emotion, and change. The Arbatel's Olympic spirits must be understood within a planetary worldview. They are not random spirits, they are expressions of the cosmos ordered through celestial intelligence. To study them is to study the hidden planetary architecture of life itself. So this makes the Arbatel a remarkable bridge between astrology, ceremonial magic, theology, and spiritual philosophy. It gives the planets spiritual personality and presents them as intelligences participating in divine governance. So when you practice high magic and you start doing hexagram rituals, you're working directly with planetary influences. So you will have to know, if you're going to get into high magic, period, you will have to know some astrology. Okay. Eritron, the spirit of Saturn. So Eritron is the Olympic spirit associated with Saturn. Saturn represents structure, limitation, time, endurance, maturity, age, boundaries, and the deep mysteries of matter. In many traditions, Saturn is feared because it confronts the soul with restriction and consequence. Yet Saturn is also one of the great teachers of wisdom. Through Eritron, the Arbatel points towards the sacred function of limitation. Not every boundary is a prison. Some boundaries create form. Some delays create patience. Some restrictions teach mastery. Some losses strip away illusion. Saturn teaches that spiritual power must be contained, disciplined, and governed by responsibility. For the magician, Eritron represents the wisdom that comes through endurance. This is not the glamour of immediate power. It is the slow authority that arises when the soul has passed through time, trial, and discipline. Okay, then there's Bethor, the spirit of Jupiter. Bethor is an Olympic spirit associated with Jupiter. It represents expansion, blessings, abundance, honor, dignity, generosity, wisdom, leadership, and lawful authority. Where Saturn contracts, Jupiter expands. Where Saturn tests, Jupiter opens doors. Bethor represents the power of increase, but the Arbatel's moral framework reminds us that increase must be governed by wisdom. Prosperity without virtue becomes greed. Influence without humility becomes domination, and authority without service becomes corruption. So for the practitioner, Bethor teaches benevolent expansion. He represents the kind of growth that uplifts rather than consumes. Jupiterian power is not merely the power to have more, it is the power to become more noble, more generous, and more aligned with divine order. Phaleg, the spirit of Mars. It's associated, Phaleg is an Olympic spirit associated with Mars. Mars governs courage, conflict, force, defense, aggression, strength, and decisive action. Mars is the blade, the warrior, the fire of confrontation, and the power to cut through resistance. In spiritual terms, Phaleg represents disciplined force. Mars can destroy, but it can also defend. Mars can create conflict, but it can also protect justice. It can become rage, but it can also become courage. The Arbatel's framework teaches that martial power must be purified of cruelty, impulsiveness, and egoic domination. And for the practitioner, it teaches how to act with strength without becoming enslaved by violence. He represents the courage to confront obstacles while remaining under divine law. Oak, or the spirit of the sun. The sun represents illumination, vitality, healing, wisdom, honor, kingship, gold, and the radiant center of consciousness. In many esoteric systems, the sun corresponds to the higher self and the principle of spiritual clarity. Oak represents the solar current within the Arbatel. He is associated with life, light, brilliance, healing, nobility, and the power of revelation. The solar force gives coherence to the whole. It organizes, illuminates, and strengthens. For the magician, oak represents the aspiration towards wisdom, vitality, and spiritual radiance. He teaches that true power should illuminate rather than obscure, heal rather than corrupt, and give life rather than drain it. Then there's Haggith, the spirit of Venus. Venus governs love, beauty, harmony, attraction, art, pleasure, refinement, and relationship. In the older magical worldview, beauty was not superficial. It was evidence of harmony within creation. Haggith represents the Venusian current of attraction and refinement. This is the force that softens what is harsh, harmonizes what's divided, and beautifies what is crude, and teaches the soul through love and proportion. For the practitioner, Haggith teaches that beauty can become a path towards the divine. Love, art, harmony, grace, and refinement become sacred when they elevate the soul rather than bind it to vanity or indulgence. Ophiel, the spirit of Mercury. Mercury governs intellect, language, writing, communication, learning, interpretation, travel, craft, subtlety, and magical knowledge. Mercury is the messenger, the translator, and the bridge between worlds. Ophiel represents the mercurial current of knowledge and movement. He teaches the importance of symbols, language, correspondences, communication, and adaptability. Mercury allows a practitioner to perceive patterns and translate meaning between visible and invisible realities. For the magician, Ophiel represents the disciplined intellect in service to divine wisdom. Knowledge alone is not enough. It must be understanding, and understanding must become right use. Fuel, the spirit of the moon. The moon governs dreams, emotion, imagination, fertility, memory, and psychic sensitivity. Also cycles, change, and the hidden waters of the subconscious. If the sun illuminates, then the moon reflects. If the sun reveals, the moon receives. Fuel represents the lunar current within the Arbatel. He governs the fluid and changing dimensions of life, the imaginal realm, the tides of emotion, and the unseen forces that shape manifestation. For the practitioner, Fuel teaches receptivity, intuition, dreams, image, and inner perception. And the moon reminds us that not all knowledge arrives through reason. Some wisdom rises from the depths. Why the Olympic spirits matter. They matter because they reveal one of the central ideas of Renaissance magic. The universe is governed by living intelligences. The planets are not merely physical lights in the sky. They are spiritual principles, cosmic powers, and archetypal forces that shape both the outer world and inner life of the human being. The seven spirits form a complete planetary pattern. Saturn gives form, Jupiter expands, Mars acts, the sun illuminates, Venus harmonizes, Mercury communicates, the moon receives and reflects. Together, they describe a universe ordered through rhythm, hierarchy, and intelligence. And for the modern student, these spirits can be understood in several ways. They may be viewed as actual celestial intelligences, as planetary archetypes, as symbolic powers within consciousness, or as expressions of sacred cosmology. And regardless of interpretation, their importance lies in the way they teach us to see reality as ordered, meaningful, and spiritually alive. The Arbatel is one of the clearest examples of sacred magic within the Grimoire tradition. It doesn't represent magic as mere technique. It presents magic as relationship. The practitioner must be rightly aligned with God, with the cosmos, with spiritual hierarchy, and with their own conscious. This is why the Arbatel remains so valuable. It refuses to separate power from wisdom and magical knowledge from our moral responsibility, and it teaches that invisible forces must be approached with reverence and discernment. So in this sense, the Arbatel is not only a book about spirits, it is a book about the soul of the magician. It asks whether the practitioner is worthy of the forces they seek to contact. It asks whether the pursuit of knowledge is guided by humility or pride, and it asks whether magic serves divine order or personal ambition. For the high magician, the Arbatel offers a profound lesson. It shows that ceremonial magic is not only about ritual performance, spirit contact, or hidden knowledge. It's about becoming properly aligned with the spiritual architecture of reality. The high magician studies the Arbatel to understand planetary forces, celestial hierarchy, moral discipline, divine authority, and the right relationship between the human soul and the invisible world. The text teaches that spiritual forces are not toys, They aren't fantasies. They are not fantasies. They are not merely tools for personal gain. They are part of a divine order that must be approached with intelligence and reverence. The Arbatel therefore belongs to the higher stream of ceremonial magic, the stream that seeks wisdom, illumination, and lawful participation with the living cosmos. Perhaps the greatest mystery of the Arbatel is its tone. It is a grimoire, but it does not feel like a book of darkness. It speaks of spirits, but it continually returns to God. It teaches magic, but it demands humility. It opens the doors to planetary intelligence, but it warns the practitioner against vanity and corruption. And this is what makes the Arbatel so remarkable. It shows us a form of magic that is neither crude superstition nor mere occult technique. It is a sacred worldview. It belongs to a time when the heavens were alive, when planets were intelligences, when prayer and magic could exist within the same spiritual universe, and when the magician sought not to escape divine order, but to participate consciously within it. To study the Arbatel is to stand before an older vision of reality, a cosmos filled with spirits, governed by divine law, and structured through celestial wisdom. It reminds us that true magic was never merely about control. At its highest level, it was about alignment, reverence, and the awakening of the soul within the living universe. The heart of the Arbatel is its teaching on the 7 Olympic spirits. These beings are presented as a great planetary intelligence corresponding to the 7 classical planets. In an older magical worldview, the planets were not merely physical bodies in the heavens. They were living powers, cosmic principles, and spiritual intelligences that shape both the outer world and the inner life of the human being. The Olympic spirits, therefore, represent more than celestial rulers. They represent modes of consciousness, spiritual lessons, and archetypal forces that operate within the cosmos and within the human soul. The Arbatel represents the Olympic spirits as part of a lawful and divinely ordered cosmos. Each spirit corresponds to a planetary force and governs a particular range of influence. Saturn gives structure, endurance, time, and wisdom. Jupiter, expansion, blessings, dignity, and prosperity. Mars, courage, conflict, and decisive action. The Sun, vitality, illumination, healing, and radiance. Venus, beauty, harmony, love, and refinement. Mercury, knowledge, language, skill, and communication. Moon, dreams, imagination, fertility, emotion, and change. So together, these 7 planetary forces form a complete symbolic map of human experience. Every person contains Saturnian discipline, Jupiterian expansion, martial will, solar consciousness, Venusian harmony, mercurial intelligence, and lunar imagination. And to study the Olympic spirits is therefore not only to study celestial beings, but to study the architecture of consciousness itself. When viewed together, the Olympic spirits form more than a list of planetary beings. They form a map of the soul's powers. Eritron teaches discipline. Bethor teaches noble expansion. Phaleg teaches courage. Oak teaches illumination. Haggith teaches harmony. Ophiel teaches understanding. And Phul teaches receptivity. This planetary pattern shows that the human being is not a single simple thing. We are composed of many forces. Some contract, some expand, some act, some illuminate, some harmonize, some communicate, and some receive. Spiritual maturity requires learning how to bring these forces into proper relationship. The Arbatel therefore becomes not only a grimoire of celestial spirits, but a map of spiritual education. Each planetary force must be purified, balanced, and aligned with divine order. The number 7 has always carried profound esoteric significance. 7 planets, 7 days of the week, 7 metals, 7 tones, 7 stages, 7 heavens, and 7 powers appear throughout Western tradition. The Arbatel's 7 Olympic spirits belong to a larger symbolic pattern. The sevenfold cosmos suggests that reality unfolds through layered rhythms of influence. Human life is not governed by one force alone. It is shaped by time, expansion, conflict, illumination, love, intelligence, and imagination. And these powers correspond to the 7 planetary currents and form the structure through which human experience is refined. And to study the 7 Olympic spirits is therefore to study the sevenfold movement of life itself. And each spirit teaches a different aspect of cosmic order. together, they form a celestial mandala of a magician's education. Modern students often ask whether Olympic spirits should be understood as literal beings, symbolic archetypes, psychological forces, or spiritual intelligences, and the answer depends upon the worldview of the practitioner. Traditional ceremonial magicians often treat them as real spiritual intelligences. Modern psychological interpretations may view them as archetypal forces within the psyche. Esoteric philosophers may understand them as both, inner and outer expressions of the same planetary principles. This layered approach is often the most useful. In the older magical worldview, the inner and outer worlds mirror one another. The planets in the heavens, the spirit in the hierarchy, the force in nature, and the archetype within consciousness all express the same principle at different levels. And this is why planetary magic cannot be reduced to superstition. At its highest level, it is a way of understanding the relationship between the cosmos and the soul. The Arbatel repeatedly reminds us that the spiritual forces must be approached with moral seriousness. Each planetary force has both a higher and lower expression. Saturn can become wisdom or fear. Jupiter, generosity or excess. Mars, courage or violence. The Sun, illumination or pride. Venus, love or vanity. Mercury, understanding or deceit. The Moon, intuition or illusion. This is one of the most important lessons of the Arbatel. The planetary forces themselves are not the problem. The condition of the practitioner determines how these forces are received, interpreted, expressed. An undisciplined magician will distort the force they contact. A mature magician will seek to align that force with divine order. The Arbatel therefore teaches that the magician must refine themselves before attempting to refine reality. And this is true in any spiritual path. For the high magician, the Olympic spirits can be understood as teachers of planetary initiation. Each one confronts the practitioner with a different lesson. Saturn asks whether we have discipline. Jupiter asks whether we expand within wisdom. Mars, whether we can wield force without corruption. The Sun, whether we can embody illumination without pride. Venus, whether we can love without attachment. Mercury, whether we can know without deception. The Moon, whether we can receive without losing discernment. So this makes the Olympic spirits deeply relevant to initiatory work. They are not simply forces to be petitioned. They are mirrors of the soul's development. The magician who studies them honestly begins to see where their own consciousness is balanced and where it's distorted. So in this way, the Olympic spirits become guardians of planetary wisdom. They teach the magician how to become a lawful participant in the living cosmos. The Arbatel's planetary system teaches balance. No single planetary force is complete by itself. Saturn without Jupiter becomes oppression. Jupiter without Saturn becomes excess. Mars without Venus becomes brutality. Venus without Mars becomes weakness. Mercury without the Sun becomes cleverness without truth. The Moon without Mercury becomes imagination without discernment. The Sun without humility becomes egoic inflation. So the magician must learn to harmonize these forces within themselves. This is one of the hidden keys of the Arbatel. It's not enough to know the names of the spirits. One must understand the forces they represent and learn to bring them into the right relationship. True planetary magic is not merely about calling upon the heavens. It is about becoming a balanced vessel through which the heavens can be reflected. So this is a lot like the tree of life. You have the two pillars, mercy and severity. They have planetary correspondences. This is exactly like coming to the middle pillar or the middle path. You have to embody these things. You can't have one without the other. They're two opposite ends. The Olympic spirits remain fascinating because they preserve an older vision of the universe as spiritually alive. In the Arbatel, the heavens are not empty. The planets are not dead stones. The cosmos are not meaningless machinery. It is ordered, intelligent, ensouled, and filled with invisible relationships. Each Olympic spirit opens a doorway into one of the greatest celestial powers. Eritron opens the gate of time and discipline. Bethor, the gate of blessing and expansion. Phaleg, courage and force. Oak opens the gate of light and vitality. Haggith opens the gate of beauty and love. Ophiel, the gate of knowledge and communication. Fuel, the gate of dream and imagination. So together, they remind us that the human soul is not separate from the heavens. The same powers that move through the cosmos also move through us. And the magician's task is to become conscious of those powers, purify them, and align them with divine wisdom. This matters because it reveals the true depth of the Arbatel's planetary system. The Olympic spirits are not merely names in an old grimoire. They are symbolic gateways into the 7 classical forces that shape Renaissance magic, astrology, alchemy, and ceremonial philosophy. To understand them is to understand how earlier magicians saw the world as a living hierarchy of divine order, planetary intelligence, spiritual force, and human participation. The Olympic spirits teach that magic is not only about contacting beings, but about understanding the forces of creation and the powers within the soul. At its highest level, the Arbatel is not simply teaching us about spirits, it's teaching us about alignment, and it shows that the human being stands between heaven and earth, receiving the planetary forces, interpreting them through consciousness, and learning to become a wiser participant in the divine architecture of reality. The Arbatel remains one of the most unusual grimoires in Western esoteric tradition because it doesn't approach magic as mere force, domination, or secret technique. It presents magic as a sacred art rooted in divine order, spiritual discipline, planetary intelligence, and moral responsibility. This makes it stand apart from any other magical manual. The Arbatel does not simply ask what the magician can do. It asks what kind of person the magician must become in order to approach the invisible world rightly. And at its deepest level, it teaches us that the universe is not chaotic or meaningless. It's structured, ordered, and governed by intelligences operating within divine law. The planets are not merely lights in the sky. They are expressions of cosmic principles. The spirits are not merely names to be memorized. They are the guardians of planetary wisdom, each revealing a different force that shapes both the cosmos and the soul. The Arbatel occupies an important place in Renaissance and early modern esotericism because it preserves a worldview in which astrology, magic, theology, philosophy, and angelic hierarchy were deeply connected. In this older vision, the magician was not simply a practitioner of spells, but a student of creation. To study magic was to study the hidden order of the universe. And this is why the Arbatel remains relevant to students of ceremonial magic, planetary magic, Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, Christian esotericism, and Western occult philosophy. It reveals a form of magic that's neither crude, superstitious, or nor mere manipulation. It's a sacred science of relationship with God, with celestial order, with spiritual intelligences, and with the powers moving within the self. One of the greatest contributions of the Arbatel is its insistence that the magician's character matters. The text repeatedly points towards humility, reverence, gratitude, restraint, and wisdom. This is not accidental. The Arbatel understands that spiritual forces amplify what already exists within the practitioner. If the magician approaches with pride, pride's magnified. If they approach with greed, greed is magnified. If they approach with confusion, it's also magnified. But if they approach it with discipline, devotion, sincerity, the work becomes capable of producing wisdom. And this is why the Arbatel is not simply a grimoire of spirits. It is a mirror held before the soul of the magician. So this is, period, practicing high magic at all. Anything that you already have within you, it will amplify it. So, get the inside right and the outside will follow. And this will be a lot easier for you if you can handle it in that way. For the high magician, the Arbatel offers an essential teaching. Magic must be governed by alignment. The practitioner does not stand above the cosmos as a controller of forces. The practitioner stands within the cosmos as a conscious participant in divine order. This is the difference between lower magic and higher magic. Lower magic seeks results without transformation. Higher magic understands that every true operation changes the operator. The magician who works with planetary forces must eventually confront those same forces within themselves. Saturn will reveal their discipline or lack of it. Jupiter reveals their relationship with abundance and pride. Mars reveals the anger and courage. Sun reveals ego and the higher self. Venus reveals their attachments and their capacity for love. Mercury will reveal their truthfulness or deception. And the moon will reveal their imagination, intuition, or illusion. So the Arbatel, therefore, becomes a training ground for discernment. And it teaches that the heavens are not only above us, they are within us. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of the Arbatel is that it preserves an older and more enchanted vision of reality. It comes from a world where the cosmos were alive with meaning, where the planets were intelligent, where spirits belonged to divine hierarchy, and where prayer and magic were not always enemies, and where the human soul was understood as a part of a vast spiritual architecture. So to modern eyes, this worldview may seem strange, but to the esoteric student, it carries a profound truth. The Arbatel reminds us that reality is not merely mechanical. It is symbolic, intelligent, layered, and responsive, and it teaches that the visible world is not only the outermost garment of the deeper order. The magician who studies the Arbatel is not merely studying an old grimoire. They are studying a sacred map of the relationship between heaven and earth. The wonder of the Arbatel is that it doesn't shout. It doesn't overwhelm the reader with terror, spectacle, or force. The power is quieter, more refined, and more dignified. It speaks like an old master reminding the student that magic is not a game, and that spirits are not curiosities, and that wisdom must come before power. The Arbatel stands as a reminder that the true magician is not one who commands the invisible world through ego, but one who becomes aligned with divine order so completely that the invisible world recognizes their authority. Its Olympic spirits are not merely planetary beings. They are mirrors of the cosmic forces through all of creation. To encounter them is to encounter the architecture of the heavens. To understand them is to understand something of the soul. And to approach them rightly is to remember that true magic has always been less about control and more about communion with the living intelligence of the universe. The Arbatel remains one of the most important and distinctive texts in the Western grimoire tradition. It's a work of planetary magic, Christian esotericism, sacred philosophy, and spiritual instruction. Through its teachings, it preserves a universe governed by intelligence, hierarchy, rhythm, and divine order. Unlike many grimoires, the Arbatel does not reduce magic to command. It teaches reverence. It teaches humility. It teaches that the practitioner must be morally and spiritually prepared before approaching the hidden forces of creation, and in doing so, it offers one of the clearest examples of magic as sacred participation rather than mere manipulation. For the historian, the Arbatel reveals the worldview of Renaissance esotericism. For the magician, it offers a map of planetary forces and spiritual responsibility. For the mystic, it points towards a universe alive with divine intelligence. And for the serious student of the Western tradition, it remains a reminder that old grimoires were not merely books of power, and at their highest level, they were books of wisdom. So the Arbatel teaches that the cosmos are not empty, the planets are not silent, and the soul is not separate from the heavens. It invites us to see creation as a living order filled with intelligence, mystery, and sacred relationship. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson, that true magic begins when the human being learns to stand humbly between heaven and earth, listening for the hidden harmonies of the divine. Okay, you guys, thanks for sticking around. I know these videos are getting really long, but this stuff needs to be kind of covered in depth. So I've got the Picatrix will be coming up next. I had my list in front of me and it's gone. So yeah, the next one coming up will be the Picatrix, and then I'm doing the Lesser Key of Solomon as well, and Hermeticism, and some other stuff. So anyway, thank you guys. Again, I appreciate each and every one of you. If you've hung around this long, you are badass. Okay, I'll see you guys later. Bye.